Good afternoon, and welcome to the research paper presentation presented by Major League Baseball. My name is Hirsch, and I'm on the Sloan research paper team. It's my pleasure to introduce Javier Fernandez, who will be presenting Decomposing the Immeasurable Sport, a deep learning EPV framework for soccer. The presentation will last 20 minutes, after which we'll hold a Q&A session for 5 minutes. If you're interested in asking a question, just raise your hand and we'll walk the mic over to you. Now please join me in welcoming Javier Fernandez.
So soccer is a sport with the highest value of a point there is among all the top sports in the world. So what this means is that just 1 point in soccer, that is 1 goal, can change the game drastically from one moment to another. So this is one of the key aspects to understand why this game is so hard to analyze. So if we see a soccer footage like this one, in which we overlaid the pitch control model we presented last year, just to add some more information to it, can you tell there what are the actions of value? Or how much are on-ball and off-ball actions of players contributing with an increased likelihood of scoring a goal? Or what are the most dangerous places to lose the ball, and what will happen if you lose the ball there? So these and many other are typical questions that come from coaches, but that are really hard to explain or to solve with the typical methods we have been seeing in soccer so far. Okay, finally, yes. So in the year 2014, here at MIT Sloan, Alex Demure, Dan Servon, Luke Bourne, and Kirk Goldsberry presented this expected possession value framework, EPV, which from my perspective was the first comprehensive approach to decision-making analysis in basketball. So they estimated the expectation of scoring of how much points are going to be scored given all the information on one state. But the most interesting part for me of this paper is the ability to ask what would happen if I do that player would have chosen a different pass or to take a shot or to make a ball drive. So when you inspect about this model, you can definitely see how you will benefit, how soccer can benefit from this model. That will be a huge benefit. It's a model that definitely will fit with soccer. But if we would like to implement this in soccer, we will really need to make some drastic changes to account for the nuances of this sport. Okay, so there are at least 3 huge things that we really need to take into account if we're trying to model the expectations of goals of the possession in soccer. The first one is that in soccer we have looser notions of possessions. You can lose the ball in any place. It's very important to take into account turnover. And Johan Cruyff even might say that soccer is a game of making the fewer mistakes as possible, right? A second thing that is so important is that you cannot just assume in soccer that passes go strictly direct to a player, to the player's feet. They can go anywhere on the field. So we need to take into account that thing, that passes can go to any location on the field. And a last one is about context. And context is important in analysis for any sport, but in particular in soccer, it's so important to take into account what's happening in that moment of the match. So based on this, we basically want to model something that looks like this. This is the general expression for EPV in soccer, which is similar for basketball. Here we are modeling the expectation of scoring a goal or having a goal against, given all the spatiotemporal information we can have at every given moment during a soccer possession, right? So when we do this with something like the following, this is working strangely. I really have to point there, as they told me. I'm sorry, not really. Okay, good. So if we want to model this, we need to have a comprehensive description of this state. We're modeling this as a Markov decision process, and for this we're taking the Markov assumption that all the information we have in this state is going to be sufficient to estimate what's going to happen in that possession. And that's pretty huge. So in order to make that a little bit closer to truth, we really need this comprehensive description of the state. So what kind of things are we using to try to describe the current state of that soccer action, or that moment in that soccer possession? The first thing is, when it goes, is information about effective playing field, right? These are things such as the block positioning of the two teams that provides information about if a pass was an inside or outside pass, if you have a shrink block or an extend block that has information about the context. Or things such as the blue lines you're seeing now, which we call dynamic formation lines. That is a clustering you do with players to know the different pressure lines the opponent is having right now. And if you will have that information, that will add more information about things such as block pressure or overcoming lines, or even knowing in which contextual phase of the possession you are. Are you doing a build-up or a progression phase or finalization phase? So something else we can take and we are taking into account regarding the spatial part of this state is a physics-based model of pitch control, from which we can relate information such as spatial advantage and pressure from players, and take into account velocity of players at any given moment to know how that will impact the possibilities I have from this state. Also, we of course can include information about the absolute position of all the players, relative distances and angles, and passing and shooting lanes that provides information about interceptability and so on. So basically we have a comprehensive definition of that state, and when we model this, the first expression that we saw, we got something like this. This is at the bottom part of this plot. You have this curve that is the frame-by-frame estimation of the expectation of goals in that possession. So if you analyze that footage thoroughly, you can see different things. The first time, you have Seri Roberto making a back pass. And that back pass is actually increasing the likelihood of scoring goals, because it frees up Iniesta to have lots of possibilities to play in a very nice angle. So lots of things have been said about back passes, so not all back passes are bad. You also get things such as not necessarily moving some meters towards the opponent's goal increases the likelihood of scoring. Or you can get some other things from that, like, for example, seeing differences or changes or drastic changes in EPB is a fast way to take or to get an approach to high value actions, right? So this is cool. We get some info from that. That's a basic perspective of what EPB is, and you can build this with black box models and so on. But we then get the next question, and is that we need to use this for practical reasons. So if we're getting questions from coaches, how can we interpret why this value is high or why this value is low at any given moment? So for that, yes. What we are doing is basically modeling the initial expectation as a decomposed model that is based on three main components. We have a passing component, a ball drive component, and a shooting component, right? And then you have an action likelihood model that joins all those components together. This is basically the likelihood or the probability a player is going to take this pass or that ball drive on an action. But the interesting thing is that following the initial things we have mentioned, we're modeling these passes and ball drives to be taken to any location on the field, not just assuming that they're going to go straightly to one or another player. Also, we don't have enough time here to get more into the technical details, but just to mention some of how do we learn these different parts of the model, we just have first to say that this is great. Can you go forward, please, just to kind of manage to make it work? Nice. So we train each of those parts or each of those components independently. And just to mention a few ways of how we do that, there are different problems. The action policy model for that, we are using a convolutional neural network. For the pass expectation, we are using some, and also the ball drive expectation, we are using some custom deep neural networks. For the shooting part, that is basically an expected goals models, we're using logistic regression, anything that fits better to the kind of problems we are solving, but then we are getting a better grasp of, or we're just getting an implementation of each of those independent components. So this slide decided to go forward. So what we want to do now is basically knowing how do we model just one specific part of that whole decomposition of EPV, okay? So let's focus on that. For example, how we model the expectation of goals given that we decided to pass. So this basically looks like this. You get in the red parts of this surface, higher probability of that possession ending in a goal if you will pass there, and in blue, lower probability to end in a goal if you will pass there. So we can, at the same time, decompose this in 4 main parts. Let's assume a pass can be successful or unsuccessful. So we have the expectation surface of that pass being successful. We have the probability of the pass being successful. I'm going to ask you here if you can to move forward because not managing to get there. So the next thing is the expectation of the pass being unsuccessful. So a turnover, which is the next surface, should be having. Can you just click three times and suppose we're getting there? So basically, we get different surface for a different independent components or different parts of the main component we are trying to estimate. And at the end, what we basically get is, it's moved so far. Okay, doesn't matter. Basically, what we're about to show there is that instead of just having that information for one frame, we have that information for every possible frame during the whole possession. So basically, we have something like this. For the different components we have commented, we have layered surfaces of information. And these colors that you see there is numerical information from which we can inspect what's going on that state in that moment and what would happen if the player will decide it differently, right? So let's take a more motion movement example of how that goes. Here we're just seeing this surface, the state EPV that is similar to what I just mentioned, but now taking into account turnovers. And then you're going to have this circle around players that it's going to be filled up is if the player has an increased EPV added. And EPV added is that if you will pass to that player, there's a higher increased likelihood of that possession and then in a goal, so he's better positioned to get the ball. So this looks like this. And you can see how this changes drastically along the match. And then we also can take a little grasp of how the contextual features are playing a role in this model. You're going to see now that when Rakitic makes this pass to Busquets, he's going to overcome the first line of pressure. And just when he does that and Busquets gets the ball, there's an increased likelihood in that area that the possession is going to end in a goal. Then he moves back and the surfaces changes. The whole teams are reorganizing and then you have lower likelihood to end in a goal. And that basically explains a little bit the complexity of soccer, but you can inspect of things about what's happening along the whole field. Let's wait patiently. We're probably gonna get there. We can still see some surfaces along the time. Wow. Okay, good. So we have that. We have layer surfaces of information we can work with. But how can we use this in a practical manner? So we think there are many possible practical applications for this decomposed approach to EPV. One of those is pass maps. This is something that we call evolved pass maps. So pass maps are a typical visualization in soccer, and they provide basically the mean position of players for different passes and frequency of passes. So here we are seeing something similar, but having that qualitative information that we can get from the EPV model. So you get as well the mean position of players when they got a pass from Rakitic. Also, the size of the circle around players is the level of pressure, the mean level of pressure those players were having when they get the ball. But the interesting part is that if you see the arrow connecting every pair of players, you'll see that we, instead of just plotting that with a mean value or with a frequency, we're trying to plot there the distribution of value of those passes. So if you take a look at passes between Rakitic and Suarez, basically the top 25% of passes between that Rakitic provided to Suarez are of high value, are of great value. So this is a way of inspecting where is that team generating value and how can we, for example, link this to a video to provide meaningful information to coaches or to analysts to understand what's going on. And this is important because in soccer it's so hard to extract what is meaningful instead of what is just frequent and happening. So something else we can take a look at is not the on-ball part of the ball, but off-ball contributions from players. So we know the players have the ball on average 3 minutes per match, so it's really, really important, the off-ball movements in this sport. And what we're seeing this is 3 different types of heat map. So the first one is showing the typical heat map we'll just get that is very common in soccer. That is where was the player positioned? It's just where he was there, right? So what can you extract there from these 4 players? There are just 4 positions of 4 players in one match. You get no much that the actual position of the players, where they were. So we can see something different that is, let's use EPV added, that is those places where those players were positioned in such a place that if they will get the ball there, they will increase the value of the possession. Right. So in these few places are the locations on the field where this left back and right back and central midfielder and striker were positioned to really increase the likelihood of the possession ending in a goal if they will get the ball there. For example, if you just focus on the striker, you can see that this is a striker that has a tendency to go down and contribute with the positioning playing, with the possession style playing of that team to really go back and make the pass back. And you can really see if these players are being located in right spots to contribute with the team. And what happens in soccer is that if we compare this to the other places where they were, let's say, badly located, which is not that accurate, or located in places where if they will get the ball there, they will decrease the likelihood of the possession ending in a goal, is so frequent and it's all around the place because this is a changing and dynamic sport, right? So that's a good example of how hard it is to get the valuable things from just the frequent things. And from that, you can really inspect what a player is doing and trying to modify some behaviors or just provide feedback of how a player or a team is playing. So we think that on top of this, we can have many more applications. Here we just list some of them. For example, what I said at the beginning, which is identify high-value actions from drastical change or just changes in EPV in time. You can start getting a better inspection into the idea of risk and reward in soccer, analyzing player passing profiles. As we just saw, we can also better inspect as off-ball movements of players, so we can go back at the idea of space creation and know if those players are moving to create a space of value, and getting the whole surface to know if the likelihood of the whole team is increasing given to the movement of these players or some combination of players. We, at the end, can get a more qualitative analysis of what is going on, both taking into account spatial information and contextual information about the state of the game. So, as some final remarks, we have that first, we think we have provided one of the first comprehensive frameworks or toolboxes to qualitative analysis in soccer. We want to go beyond what is frequent and really try to see what provides value. We have proposed this model in a decoupled way just for sake of interpretability. Probably it's not the best way of building the best model possible, but now we can really inspect and see visually and see in time why things happen the way they happened and what will happen if we will behave differently. Also, the good thing is that each of these components can be extended or adapted independently. So for example, you might think that the action likelihood model is very different in Barca from a different team that plays long ball. So you just can train or extend that part of the model independently and then adapted that there to get some small variations of the final EPV value you get. But at the end, what we want to make is keep making a strong emphasis on really making a use of spatial temporal information to try to get a better grasp of soccer, and also to start adding contextual features, because this is a sport that breathes context every time. Thank you very much.
Some time for questions now, if anybody.
Thanks. Yeah, so first, congratulations on building what looks like a beautiful and powerful model. My question is, does your model include player-specific effects? And if so, how do you represent those in a deep learning framework?
It doesn't. Has a lot of mean, a lot of stuff. So it tells you what's more likely to happen next based on historical information. This has been said a lot of, and when we talk with coaches and analysts, they always say like, yeah, but is this taking, for example, a pressure model, taking into account that Messi can get the ball in smaller spaces than other players? So definitely the good thing we can get from that is that is very important for soccer. It's not critical to get information with which you can work with, right? So this is valid to do that. So the good thing is that it's really easy or it's really viable to take the next step. The first problem is that there's probably enough data of the type of data you need to build this to get there, which is tracking data from players. But you can start adding features that are not saying this is Messi and this is this player, but features that have to do with skills of that player, right? So that will be more generalizable, and probably you can extrapolate a little bit more what's the effect of the player. So that's a very nice like next step from this. Right now we're trying to figure out what kind of interesting things of value and movement and stuff we can say just from the mean model, which is enough to digest for now, actually.
Hi. How does the model address the question of passing into open areas or through balls? as you started with?
This slide,
Passing into open areas where a player could run into, but is not there at this point in time?
I don't know if I follow you well. Can you repeat, please? Just yeah.
Sure. So how does the model address the point of where are the good areas or better areas to pass to, like open areas to pass to, where a player could hit through balls and a player can reach?
Yeah. So you're basically telling to the model, okay, from this state that is providing information of the whole field, right, which is a spatial positioning and influence of all the players in the whole field and the other many things you have, and contextual info of every location of that field. If in this place you have overcome the first line or the second line and so on, you're just learning from historical data to integrate on all the possible path the possession can take from that state. So what this is basically learning is a generalization of what will happen then. I mean, like really understanding these features in a different space to see what's the estimation of this ending in a goal or in a goal against, right? So if you integrate among all the things happening, you basically get a grasp of what is common to happen there. The important thing is that you're not using location and angles, which gonna have just very linear relationship to what will happen next. You're trying to extrapolate from more complex information to see if the model can grasp that, and you can see some ideas of that, like in that example in which you overcome lines with a pass, and you can see how that contextual change in a very few window of time really increases the expectation of that ending in a goal and so on. Yeah. Okay, thank you. All right.